Now, where did you live as a young child? You said you were born in Yonkers.
Yes.
Did you live there, or?
No, actually, I've lived. I lived my entire childhood and a good portion of my adulthood right here in Riverdale.
Where did you attend school?
Well, I attended
When you were a child, elementary.
Well, yeah, elementary school. Well, I started out attending PS 81 on Riverdale Avenue. Then for 2 years, I went to the SAR Academy, which is on 254th Street, and then I came back to PS 81 and graduated from PS 81.
Did you have any religious education during
Yes.
that time?
Yes, SAR is an Orthodox religious school.
Right. And what about when you were going to 81?
When I was going to 81, I was part of the conservative synagogue's Hebrew school program.
Your parents, were they members of the conservative synagogue?
Yes,
At that time?
Yes, they were members of the conservative synagogue at that time. Originally, my father started out going to services at the Hebrew Home for the Aged. He went there with my mother and his father, and actually the rabbi there, Rabbi Joseph Frazer, was the sandik at my bris. But they had a falling out, basically, and yeah, we went to the conservative synagogue basically since the time that I was about 4 or 5.
How was Judaism observed in your home?
Judaism in my home when I was a kid
Yeah.
was it was inculcated. It was I would say fairly strictly observed, at least by my standards now. Yeah.
Who were your friends in elementary school, young childhood? Were they children from where you lived, your building, or from your school?
For the most part, I mean, the funny thing is I actually didn't have too many friends when I went to PS 81, but they were usually friends from my building, from my apartment complex.
Were any of these children that you played with that you knew of children of survivors?
No, no.
Okay. What about your relationship with your grandparents when you were a child? Where did they live? I know your father's parents were living when you were a young child.
Well, my grandmother was living when I was a young child. I'm named Ari after my grandfather Arthur, who died a year before I was born.
So you never knew him?
No.
Your sister knew him, though?
Yes, she did.
Yeah. Were you close with your grandmother? Did she live near you?
She lived with us
So you
for a
were
while.
close.
Yeah, she lived with us. She went. She was in. Sometimes she was in Fieldston Lodge. There was a time when we had to bring her home because there was a nurses' strike. But yes, for the most part, she lived with us. Yeah.
And did you enjoy having her around?
Oh, absolutely. I still miss her, actually. In fact, one of the first sketches that I did after I came back to Riverdale was I did a sketch of her, which now hangs above the door inside my bedroom. She was great. I mean, one of the funny things is, though, that, and I only found this out in about 1994, 1993, 1994, was that she wasn't speaking English to me. I did not know that. But she was speaking German to me. And I had no idea. Because I told my parents one time, well, Grandma said this. They're like, how do you know what she said? She wasn't speaking English. To me, I just understood it. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah.
Yes. So you were quite close to her then, if you
Oh, yes.
understood her, no matter
Yeah.
what language she was talking.
Well, she used to feed me. We used to watch TV together and fall asleep. Because my grandmother was born in 1893, so at the time that I was born, she was 79 years old. So we used to watch TV and fall asleep. She used to try and read a book to me called Danny and the Dinosaur, which came out as Danny and the Dinosaur when she read it. And also I remember, my memory goes way back, so I remember she and my mother used to change me when I was a baby. And she lived with us, and she was a very benevolent presence in our house.
What about your Aunt Rosalind? Was she living close by?
No.
Where did she live?
Well, at that time, she was and she still lives in Livingston, New Jersey. Although I believe before I was born, they lived in Connecticut, they lived in Ohio, and then finally Livingston depended on her husband's job.
Did she have children?
Yes, she had 2 children. My cousin Jeffrey, who was born sometime in the mid-50s, and my cousin Janine, who's about 3 years older than my sister.
Did you have much contact, you and your sister, with your cousins as you were growing up?
Yes, we did. Actually, we did, because my father used to make sure that, we would get together. First of all, we all had to go to Rosalind's house for Passover. A lot of times we would go there for Thanksgiving. Then my father basically had them come over to our house a lot of times for Hanukkah. So I had a lot of contact with them when I was a kid.
What about on your mother's side, her parents? And did you have any uncles or aunts from her side of the family?
My mother's an only child.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew her mother. She died before I was born. But I did know her father.
So you had one grandfather and one grandmother.
Yes.
Different sides of the family when you were growing up. If you can remember when you were a child, did you know anything at all when you were elementary age, say, of what your father and aunt and your grandma had gone through during the war? Did they talk
yes.
about it to you?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because at the conservative synagogue, back in about, I'd say 1978, maybe 1977, my father basically established a Yom HaShoah program. And it was met, believe it or not, with a lot of resistance from the members of the synagogue, because they were all, people who grew up here for the most part. There were a lot of German Jews in the synagogue, but from the Jews who grew up here in the United States, there was a lot of resistance to a Yom HaShoah program. But my father pulled it through, and he organized Yom HaShoah memorials at the synagogue. So, from an early age, I was enveloped in the cloud of the Shoah. In fact, one of the things that makes me different is that, a lot of kids never grew up with 2 boxes of soap from the concentration camp in their house that were actually made from the rendered fat of human beings. we had that in our house. My father had the armband that my grandmother stitched in our house. Yeah, there was from an early age there was quite a bit of contact with the Shoah.
Did you feel you could ask your father questions about it?
Well, when I was young, when I was very young, I wasn't the question asking type at that point, but it's funny. I've asked him questions as an adult. I really didn't have to ask too many questions as a teenager because by the time that I was about 13, I actually got him his first speaking gig. Which I was the president of the Akiva Club at Junior High School 141. And the teacher, who was the faculty advisor, who was the Hebrew teacher, knew that my father was a Holocaust survivor. So he wanted my father to come to the school and give a speech to the Akiva Club. And that actually started him speaking in schools. From my middle teens, early teens actually, onward, I really didn't need to ask too many questions because a lot was said.
So mostly you heard the story in a chronological or straightforward way when he was giving speeches at your school. You would hear the speech.
Yeah, I heard the speech, yeah, but it also started him, really talking about my relatives and what happened to them. There were a lot of sort of family mysteries as to what happened to people after the war and all that. And it's a funny thing, I thought that, I don't know if this was intentional or not intentional, but my sister and I always believed that we were the last Spetts, around, that we were the last Spetts who survived the war, but it turns out that we were not. There were Spetts all over the place, actually. Yeah, I mean, there was always conversation going on. And with that inundation of Holocaust conversation, one of the things what I did ask about, especially this one time, was basically what life was like before the war. I asked my father a question. I asked him, now, and this is how I phrased the question. I said, now, in France, children are weaned off of milk around the age of 8, and they're started on wine. I said, in the United States, we drink soda. I said, what did you used to drink with dinner? Because they were, strictly kosher. So I said, what did you used to drink with dinner when you were growing up? So my father said, that's a good question. And he thought about it. And he said, soda. He said, mother would get a glass and she would pour some syrup into it. And then they had a seltzer bottle. And she would spray the seltzer into the glass. And then she would mix it up with a spoon. And I thought that was very novel, that my father used to drink soda with dinner, just pretty much in the same way as I do. So, yeah.
Did you ever feel, it sounds like your father was quite open within the family about his experiences.
Mm-hmm, yes.
You'd say that. Did you ever feel like it might be a little too much for you at times?
At times. I'll give you an example. There was one time that I believe I was about 6, and my father had organized a Yom HaShoah memorial at the conservative synagogue. And we were watching a film on Anne Frank. And, I started tearing up, and breaking up. And I called my father over. He's like, "What's wrong?" I said, "I don't feel too well." I said, "My stomach is bothering me." So he took me into the kitchen of the synagogue. And he's like, "Drink some water, your stomach will feel better." And I didn't want to. And he actually got fairly upset with that. He was like, "Why are you telling me that your stomach is bothering you, if it's not?" He's like, "Get back out there." And he's like, because he was running the whole thing, so he had things to do. So, yeah, so I mean, it could be overwhelming at times,
It sounds like it could be, because talking about it seems to, or running shows about it, seems to have been a large part of your father's life.
Oh yeah,
So you were exposed to it all the time.
One of the setups that they would do for a Holocaust memorial was my father had posters, I guess I would imagine that they were from the Wiesenthal Center, something like that, of huge heaps of dead bodies and skulls, and the crematoria and cans of Zyklon B and concentration camps and all of that. And yeah, I was exposed to that imagery from a very early age. Yeah.
Did you ever have nightmares because of it?
Nightmares because of that? No, not really.
You never had any nightmares with Holocaust imagery in it, or dreams of yourself being in the Holocaust? Because you seem to have been surrounded.
Yeah, I was surrounded, but not really because of that. Back then, I had a bigger fear of the Soviets than I had of of anything else.
What about your father? Did he ever have any nightmares or flashbacks?
Oh, yes.
Or
yes, he has, and on some occasions he still does. Yeah.
Would you know that when you were? Would you hear him scream or anything during the night when you were a child?
Not when I was a child, but as an adult, actually, the nightmares started popping up. At least that I could figure. Not when I was a child, though. But
you may have slept through it when you were.
Possibly, but these were pretty hard to sleep through, especially if we shared a hotel room. It was very difficult to sleep through because I don't know, whatever chemical is supposed to keep you still while you're asleep wasn't quite working with him. So he would shout things and and all sorts of things, and yeah, that was quite frightening.
Yes, I would imagine. So how did your mother handle that?
That's a good question. I don't know.
But you found it frightening, but you probably felt there was nothing you could do to help.
No, it's the only thing that I could hope was that he wouldn't sleepwalk or anything of that type of nature.
Right. Now, when we go back to the conservative synagogue, you were there when you were a young child. Were you bar mitzvahed there?
Yes, I was.
And who did you have at your bar mitzvah?
Yes, I was bar mitzvahed at the conservative synagogue.
Right.
I had a great teacher, Cantor Gordon Pilch. Yeah, he is really great. I'm sorry that he's gone from the conservative synagogue now. He was fantastic. Those were actually the first music lessons that I ever had. He figured out a way to teach kids who were non-musicians how to sing and also not only how to sing, but how to sing essentially in a language that we had no idea what we were saying. Yeah, and see, that's a funny thing that he kind of took for granted, because he would say, put emphasis here. It says, this, that, and the other thing, and I would be like, okay, if you say so, because I didn't understand the biblical Hebrew text. So yeah.
Was it a big family affair? Did you have a party afterward?
Well, actually, the funny thing is, most of the people at my bar mitzvah, I mean, naturally, my aunt was there and my cousin were there, but most of the people at my bar mitzvah were from the synagogue and from conservative Judaism. So, for example, Rabbi Ismar Shorsh was there, Rabbi Schachter was there, all the leaders, Rabbi Tucker was there. All the leaders of conservative Judaism were there, actually.
You know what I didn't ask? Your grandmother?
Yes.
When did she pass on, and how old were you then?
She passed away, I believe it was October 25th, 1978. She was in the Fieldston Lodge nursing home. It was Simchas Torah, Arab Simchas Torah, and we received a call from them saying that she died of pneumonia.
So you were about 6 years old.
Yes, I was 6
But
years
you have very fond and strong memories of her from that age.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we used to, when she was at Fieldston Lodge nursing home, I guess part of the group stuff that they did was she created stuffed animals for me and my sister. She crocheted a turtle. She made these fuzzy things out of a coat hanger and yarn. So she did those things there. And this is an interesting thing. I was actually punished by my first grade teacher for taking off for her funeral.
At PS 81?
At PS 81. I had a rather mean first grade teacher by the name of Florence Richter. And she was a miserable person, to say the least. So I got extra homework for missing school for my grandmother's funeral.
That's very surprising. I mean, I'm sure that you had a note from your family that you'd been there. So there you were, and was this the first death that you had to go through?
Well, my mother's father died the year before.
So you had been to that funeral?
No, I hadn't.
You hadn't. So this was your first experience of going to a funeral, and then to have that?
Well, actually, I wasn't at the funeral because my parents considered I was too young. I wouldn't understand what was going on. So I stayed with a neighbor who kept my mind off of things. She herself was an art student, so we did stuff with that. I also used to get punished for taking Jewish holidays off. This was before Jewish holidays were included in the vacation schedule of public schools. So if I took off for Rosh Hashanah, or if I took off for Yom Kippur, I was basically punished by doing like 3 times the homework.